Josh, I think, made it through
Recording is on.
almost every call.
Hey everybody, we're doing our final session of the Mastering the Lightning reading group. We've made it through the entire book here, which is pretty cool. Got the few and the proud that made it through. And you know, for our last session here, there's kind of a conclusion chapter called 17 that's listed in the GitHub kind of like the list of all the files. I didn't actually see it listed in the table of contents. It's a really short chapter, so we can talk about that kind of stuff if we want to. But I was really kind of thinking for this session, we just kind of do some like kind of key takeaways from the book here. And, you know, so some of us here are primarily designers in the design community, and some of us here are primarily developers in the BDK community. So just thought we'd kind of go over some, you know, what some of our key things were that we learned. And I've got like a little fig jam I put together with some of my thoughts, and I might just go ahead and start off there just to get the conversation warmed up, and then kind of turn it over to everyone else for discussion here. Let me go ahead and close all my million Figma tabs here. And then I didn't even name this document. Let me name it Mastering LN Final. And then I'm going to just share it in the chat here. And then I'm just going to share my screen. Window, Figma. Cool. Can everybody see my screen okay?
I can see it.
Oh, I got like a little applause sound effect there. That's great. So I just kind of grouped my thoughts into three main ideas here for designers. That Lightning is extensible. You know, it's like unlike, you know, on-chain Bitcoin, there's a much greater variety of ways that people can interact with Lightning than they can with on-chain Bitcoin. And you know, that manifests itself like official kind of protocol things, like, you know, new bolts, like offers would be an example of that. And then sometimes people build these like optional features on top of that, like AMP and key send, and there's feature bits, which is a whole thing. And so then like another layer on top of that is people build these apps that kind of interact with Lightning, like LN URL, and then LN bits that interacts with LN URL. So there's just whole extensible, you know, just variety of ways that, you know, you can design products that interact with Lightning. And then the other kind of thing for designers is just that Lightning moves incredibly fast. So like in less than 5 years, we've basically had at least four different implementations of Lightning: LND, C Lightning, Eclair, LDK. Compare that to Bitcoin, where we mostly just have Bitcoin Core. So Lightning moves very fast. We've got a lot of new nodes in 2021. We got this new thing called Lightning Address, which I think it's only been around like a year or less. And like now all these wallets support it. So like if somebody has a good idea in Lightning, it can just be adopted very rapidly and very quickly. It's just kind of completely the opposite. And then just privacy is still an issue. Like Lightning helps privacy, but just kind of like what we were talking about last time is that Lightning Explorers show a lot of information. Unlike with on-chain Bitcoin, where like you have this whole transaction history for the entire world, it's more like in Lightning that specific individuals or businesses can be targeted. So someone can kind of target your node and do these like probes and attacks to try and find information about it. And kind of as designers, if we don't design good non-custodial Lightning services and products, then people are going to opt for custodial ones, which they're just going to have their whole transaction history mined because they're using a custodian. So yeah, privacy is an issue if we don't, you know, design good non-custodial products. And Lightning moves fast and is very extensible, which is like, that's a good thing because you can ship new users to features that help them out, but you can also break cross compatibility if you don't do that well. So all of these things present pros and cons for designers when trying to design good non-custodial Lightning products. And those were kind of some of my key thoughts from the books. from the book for designers. And I will shut up now for everyone else.
No, yeah, I think you bring up a good point too, that it's not you can have non-consensus protocols basically, that just it's possible in Lightning to have protocols that just the end wallet support, just 2 endpoint support. And then there's other ones that just a subset of the intermediate nodes can support, which is definitely a big difference in terms of, it seems like from a developer point of view, there's a lot more options you need to select from, not that the user might, but both sides have to agree on there is this interoperability, which you don't see as much you don't see people doing interoperability testing so much with core, because pretty much you just have to be on the same version of the reference implementation. Although there are different core implementations, but yeah, they're not generally, it's a pretty small community.
Yeah, the only one I know of is BTCD.
Yeah, I think like Luke Dash Jr. keeps his own fork of core, but it's basically just, I think he just takes a subset of the PRs. It's not really a different implementation per se. But yeah, it's a pretty minor thing compared to Lightning, where you do have all these different features, and some of them are incompatible, maybe, or not incompatible, I guess, but like thinking like the Lightning address and the different ways of doing push payments, kind of those two, LNURL versus is it Lightning address? Is that the other one? LNURL, and then
Lightning address is one of them.
Well, yeah.
Lightning address kind of lives on top of LNURL. It's kind of like a way. It basically is a way for like, you give my server an email address, and I'll give you an LNURL address, and then the LNURL address is like, okay, I'll give you an invoice. It's the way I understand it.
Right. Yeah, so that's some compatibility issues people have to worry about there.
One thing I recently learned about too is I was doing a deep dive, kind of rereading chapter 15 for the Atlanta group, and I was reading, Christoph had this Google Doc for kind of the sending payments section of the design guide, where he was kind of laying out all the different, forms of, trying to get an invoice, and different invoice types like Bolt 11, Bolt 12, and then you had listed AMP on there, Christoph. So I put out a tweet about like, what is the difference between an AMP and a Bolt 11 invoice? And somebody from Lucas from Lightning Labs tweeted back this morning that it was basically something in the feature bits. So I did kind of a deep dive with Polar and started generating invoices and putting them through Beck32 decoders, and I found that sure enough that the feature bits are completely different. So it presents a situation to the user where you can have it's still technically a Bolt 11 invoice. It just has different feature bits, and so you could present something that looks like a very standard Lightning invoice, but the other node might not be able to read it. And I started trying to run it. I was like, what happens if I try to pay this invoice from an older, an older version of L&D that doesn't support it? And it just gave me this error code like payment failed, can't find a route. And I was like, well, that's not very descriptive. That doesn't seem to me like exactly what's happening here, because couldn't find a route seems to me like, that's like a problem of like, oh, my node doesn't have enough liquidity. I couldn't, I didn't have a high enough channel balance. I didn't have enough channels. But AMP is like an entirely different beast where you're trying to route through multiple payments. So that kind of ties back to this, thing we keep talking about in the design community of like, you need good error messages. You need descriptive error messages that tell people what to do for situations like this.
Yeah, and is there even anything the user could do in this situation? I mean, this is a scenario where you said the other side doesn't necessarily support AMP.
Yeah, this is a situation where the receiver is requesting AMP, but the sender is incapable of the sender is incapable of sending AMP. So
right.
I would hope for some kind of scenario where maybe this is an option on the. I don't like the idea that people even have to think about AMP. Honestly,
yeah. I mean, normally what you would want, which would probably want to happen, is just under the covers, the two nodes would kind of downshift to non-AMP, right? It'd be like, okay, well, okay, I don't support it, so now we're gonna fall back to non-AMP, right? It kind of wanted to silently negotiate sort of the common denominator in terms of payment.
I wonder if LNURL does some of that stuff. I wonder, does it, if you can you put something, like an AMP invoice with, say LNURL, like, hey, give me an invoice, and then the LNURL responds,
include
okay,
the features supported kind of.
yeah, give me an invoice that satisfies these conditions.
That's a good question. I know there's a lot of information. I mean, there is information like that passed. I don't recall if like AMP was one of them, but yeah, that would be a good, because then I guess you would have to say all of the things you do support as a receiver of the funds. And then the guy creating the invoice could create his invoice. Well, no, you're triggering them, to create an invoice. So then when they create their invoice, they would include just the features that you as the receiver support, right?
Yeah,
Like
that sounds about right.
That you both supported, we have the union of both of your features that are supported.
Yeah, because the idea is like when people form two channels, when nodes form two channels, they obviously kind of negotiate which features they support using the feature bits. But when you're sending a payment, there's no guarantee that you have a connection to the receiver. So I guess there could be room for some kind of negotiation there, because you don't necessarily know what the receiver supports.
Yeah, two terms from web development come to mind, which is progressive enhancement and graceful degradation. Those seem like they have a space in this huge mess of different payment request formats and whatnot.
I'm familiar with those terms as a web dev, but do you think you could define those for people who may not be familiar?
Oh yeah, sure. So progressive, so graceful, it's all about what your standard is. So graceful degradation is if there's a certain standard that you try to shoot for, and in your current situation something's not supported, you have a mechanism to fall back to something that has broader support. It's like you need to design a website for Internet Explorer 6, right? Which has that's a long time ago, some older browser version, but that only 1% of people still use. You're going to design it and write code and CSS and styling for the majority of the browsers, but there are some flags in there that make certain tweaks where it still looks good in those older browsers. It falls back to a less feature-rich version, or it's like a non-JavaScript website, right? Websites should work without JavaScript. That's graceful degradation. And progressive enhancement is when you do the opposite, when you detect, hey, this browser, this application, this node, this wallet can do this other cool thing that very few, that doesn't have broad support, but because this situation supports it, we're going to use that. So you kind of upgrade. So you kind of, the default is kind of the broad base, and then you fall back or you enhance then based on the current situation.
I think there's been some security attacks I've heard. I don't know about browser-based, but with Wi-Fi endpoints, where one of the security protocols, the older ones were insecure, but you could force it to negotiate and say, "Oh, I only support the old one," to try to basically exploit that weakness. So I don't know if that's also something people have to consider when you allow people to downshift to older versions of stuff. Those older things may not be as secure. Seems to be opening up some issues there, but it's something. Yeah, I agree. You have to do that. There probably have to be some negotiations.
It was a hot topic in web development, particularly. I first remember hearing about it about 10 years ago, and we were trying to get the CSS3 and the HTML5 specs kind of approved. And honestly, to this day, I don't keep up with it anymore. I don't even know if they ever formally approved the specs, but nobody cares. Everybody uses those languages now. But it was just this idea that everyone was trying to build stuff for the lowest common denominator, and it was can we actually start building stuff for the future and start using this newer technology and not caring if every single browser in existence can do it? Can we just start building for what a good implementation of a browser should look like?
Right. You're forcing everybody that just because one person is still using an ancient version of Internet Explorer, nobody else can use any of these other features, kind of thing. Because I know they were a big problem not supporting new stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
does anybody else here who hasn't spoken yet have any kind of thoughts or takeaways that they wanted to share that they got from the book?
One thing for me that's a bit, it's more like metadata about the book, but I looked at the repo and I think it's 150 something contributors.
Wow.
And that's I just find is like super cool. And it you know, it's probably like a 90-10 or 80-20% distribution. It's like 2 or 3 authors are driving it, but it's such a departure from like probably 20 years ago how you would have written a book, and it tells you how much mistakes probably would be left in, and typos, and sentences that are not super clear to everyone and that kind of stuff. Whereas here you have hundreds of people contributing, and that made me like, I have my own fork of it where I've corrected 2 or 3 little things, right? And I'm thinking, well, by the end of it, maybe I'll open the PR. And
Yeah.
that was super neat. And it's the same for Mastering Bitcoin. He's on edition 3, and there's like hundreds of people who've built that book. So it's cool.
It's a different way of publishing. You don't have these professional editors necessarily that people used to require. I wonder how that affects. Yeah, he must have had to go through an interesting negotiation to get that open source development model published, but he did it. So pretty cool.
I got a couple of like typo fix PRs merged in a couple months ago.
Nice.
On that book?
Yeah.
Oh man, that's awesome. You're one of the authors.
Technically.
Yeah.
Folks,
I'm going to be in the
we have
credits.
one of the authors of the book with us today.
At least I think, yeah. And then I got a couple rejected too, because I didn't miss the cutoff. But yeah, I think John's got a couple in there too, from our community. John's Bahari got a couple in there. There's a lot of people. Yeah, there's several of us who just have these like real tiny little additions, throughout.
I've been tempted to start an initiative to redesign all the graphics, all the infographics in there. Every time we look at it, I was like, yeah, you could redesign it this way and that way. You could do some nice things here and there.
They did actually update the graphics before us sending it off to print. There were some PRs where they redid the graphics. They're a little clunky still, but they were improvement in that they when they're trying to say like, okay, in this chapter we're looking at like this specific section, they really made it very clear like which section. They like bolded it and grayed everything else out. So they tried to tweak those a little bit, but you could totally do that if you wanted, Christoph.
With all my extra time, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, just a few thoughts here. So for one, this was the first book club or reading club I ever participated in, and I wasn't sure what to expect, but I found it super interesting, and including some of these, there were just a few chapters that I just either were just over my head technically because I'm less technical, or that I did not find as relevant. But even in those, I found it really interesting to listen in on the conversations about the people who had interest in that. So just because of the group, it actually makes certain things I did find to get takeaways there. So that was kind of nice. And then for the other things, I tried to think about what's interesting to me personally, like the channel management, running nodes. That was kind of like, I have my umbrella, I like to mess with it. That was personal interest. Then the other things where I tried to pick out things were, what helps me design good interfaces, and understanding what an invoice is, understanding the relevance of channel state, the whole extensibility thing that you already mentioned, and that there's communication layer that can be used for other things also. There are some of those things that I found interesting. And it seems like Lightning is just so different. Like if you start learning Bitcoin and then you get into Lightning, you almost have to forget about a bunch of stuff because your assumptions that it's kind of similar, maybe with a few tweaks, they just don't hold up. So I found that interesting. And then also generally, I feel like as if I were just a regular pure designer, I would not get through this book if I didn't already have all kinds of prior knowledge, a group of people to talk to. It's a bit dense. So which also makes me think about this tech primer we have in the Bitcoin Design Guide, and the importance of that as a simple entry point. And I was wondering, after going through this book, reviewing that tech primer, and just expanding it based on what I learned, what we learned here, and then also linking back to the book and certain sections where it was relevant, in the hope that that's kind of an easier entry point, and then people still make their way into the book based on what's helpful to them at the moment. And thanks for everyone for showing up.
Yeah, thanks. I concur that, for me, this was sort of this is actually my first technical reading book club. I've done other just for fun book clubs. And it was great. It was great. For me, it was a big motivator to just get through the book, at least to give it one read, even if I didn't maybe get as, I didn't necessarily kind of grok everything, but to just kind of motivate to go through it was a big plus, and really appreciate everybody kind of helping do that climb together. Group effort is nice.
Yes, earned that finisher badge.
Yes.
One thing I want to add is I've been through only 5 chapters in the book. Like Christoph, like you said, I've been playing around my Umbrel for quite a while, and now I got to know the importance of having a backup, having a state maintained, and there's so much happening between maintaining a channel. So that was really interesting. And one thing that clicked was Lightning is the actual real proof of stake. None of those are none of the other altcoins that you see is this is actually you actually stake your it's actually the Bitcoin commitment transaction that's happening between that's exchange, right? So
right, and that's used by the other nodes, right, to show that you actually have a channel that can go check that open transaction on chain.
Exactly.
That's interesting.
So basically you're just exchanging transactions, commitment transactions that anyone can broadcast at any time. So that was really interesting when that clicked. And as always, I'm floored by the open source community. Like you said, so many people coming together and getting this book out, and especially this reading book club session that I've been catching up. I started only 2 weeks back. I've caught up to 5 videos so far. It's been great. Thanks so much for organizing this.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like I got a much better appreciation of, just kind of at the high level, what the security assumptions really are. I mean, like you were saying, the backups, that's one thing, but also just to really kind of, understanding enough of the lower level stuff to appreciate what the higher level implications are from a security point of view and a privacy point of view. That I think you did a good job in this more recent chapter to just, because I don't think there's I couldn't find any other places that really analyzed it that way, to talk about this protocol versus that protocol in Lightning and what the implications are, but to kind of look at them all holistically was useful. And that, I think that's a less well understood aspect for a lot of people, what the security assumptions and privacy assumptions are. So useful. Yeah.
So what's everybody the most, what developments in Lightning is everyone most looking forward to?
I mean, I'm really interested in this whole Lightning push payment sort of stuff. I would love, probably the next thing I'll do playing around with Lightning is, of course, just set up a node. So probably for me, just getting a node set up, but I would like to see how to set up maybe a Lightning tip thing. That would be just an interesting exercise. And since there are different protocols, just that gives, there's a lot more room to play there to see which ones actually which ones, because they're all fairly new, how they actually work in practice. How, for instance, for LNURL, I would be curious to see how hard will it really be to set up an LNURL server versus using LND, and it should be all included with a plugin, basically, I think, is how they do it. For not LNURL, but for the, I think it's whatever the bolt is, that it's all in band.
12.
Bolt 12. Yeah, so to actually get bolt 12 working, we'll probably try that first because it actually does sound easier to set up. And I don't know, I've heard good things about both, but that one interests me the most right now. So yeah.
The Albi is super interesting with, bringing WebLN to Lightning applications, and hopefully that will trigger some new activity around Lightning apps happening where you can
Which one is that?
stream. That's the browser extension, but also with Breeze, where they have streaming sets for when you listen to podcasts. Just that the friction just gets removed. And here in the background too, I was going over all the different ways that you can present some invoice to someone, and it's a huge mess. But when all of this comes together, they remove so much friction, and the payments can become so minuscule, like $0.01 or euros. I mean, that's really amazing when that can happen. I think there are these other conversations like, doing something over here costs like $100 per transaction, so it makes no sense. But when you remove all the friction, you get to these tiny amounts. And once all of this really flows super well, I'm excited to see what will happen there. And here's John's talking about Albi. Maybe he heard me somehow.
Yeah. I decided to come over.
Hey, Johns, we've just been sharing some of our key takeaways for designers and developers, and I just kind of prompted everybody, like moments before you joined in, I just prompted everyone with the question, what are you most excited, what, Lightning developments are you the most excited about?
For me, definitely Lightning in the browser. I mean, whether it's interactions or like WASM-based stuff, super excited to see how that's going to develop next year.
Yeah, I think the WASM stuff is going to be real cool. For anyone who's not aware, it's essentially WebAssembly, and just the idea that, if you took something like Rust Lightning, you could compile it to WebAssembly and then just run a Lightning node in your web browser.
Yeah. We actually have some work on BDK also for WASM. We have basically BDK running already in WASM. And I'm really interested for the WASM stuff for these low-end feature phones, the Chaos operating system, which is WASM based, which I've heard should be coming out sometime. I think soonish. There's going to be actual phones that you can put third-party WASM apps in. So yeah, you could basically have a Lightning Bitcoin wallet in one of these feature phones. You don't need a iOS phone or whatever, Android phone. I think that'll be cool.
So it's like an open source phone? Is that what you mean?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's going to have like an open. I mean, you can somehow go to a web page and pull in a WASM app. I haven't looked at all the details, but I believe that's how it's going to work. I mean, it's basically these phones exist today. It's primarily in India, and but I don't think they support all of the features of WASM. So, or they maybe don't support WASM at all. That like browser based, kind of like they're just running like a version of like Firefox sort of. But now the new version of it is going to support sort of these third-party apps in WASM, which would be really interesting.
Is that maybe what you were talking about, Steve? The KaiOS, maybe? I just posted a link in the chat.
Yeah, that's it. Let me see.
Yeah, it looks like they're trying to like put like apps and stuff on these like really cheap devices.
KaiOS. Yeah, KaiOS. So yeah, and it's I think Nokia maybe or something like that. Like they're making literally just like candy bar phones that can run these apps. So and they're very cheap. They're extremely cheap. So it's really opens up some possibilities for non-first world applications.
So you could run a Lightning node on there, or?
I don't think you could run a Lightning node, but you might be able to do, one of these maybe hybrid wallets where it's
Yeah.
like it's not a full routing node, but it can at least
leaf
send and
node.
receive payments, like a leaf node, right? Like a leaf
Well,
node.
well, you could. I don't see why you couldn't. Yeah, to your point, I don't see why you couldn't run a Lightning node on it. Just it wouldn't be a routing node. But like, we
Right.
think of like
Possibly.
Breeze. Like Breeze runs LND on your phone. But obviously, we have the benefit of running that on an iPhone or something. It's not a routing node. It's not routing payments on behalf because your phone isn't on all the time. But it is still technically a node, and we have the benefit of an iPhone with much more powerful computing power. But it seems to me like what you're saying is that these phones could run WASM modules. So if you did build a node, a Rust Lightning node, you could compile it to WASM and run it on this phone, assuming that the phone has enough CPU and memory to be able to facilitate it. But I don't see why you wouldn't be, assuming that the phone has enough CPU and RAM. I don't see why you couldn't build a little WASM node that is capable of sending payments in a manner similar to Breeze.
Yeah, you might also have issues with like network bandwidth. I don't know, in the countries where these phones are used, they may not have unlimited bandwidth or accessibility to bandwidth, but yeah, it definitely opens up new possibilities for lower powered, like as a lower powered device that could run some of this open source, like LND or LND, or LDK, sorry, LDK.
Okay, was there in the book, was there something about Lightning where you thought that you're disappointed? Like there was something negative where you thought, why is this that way? This is not the way it should be.
I mean, the whole invoice thing definitely seems like that's a pretty big limitation that people are working on now. To the fact that it was set up for this one sort of mode of operation where you physically exchange an invoice with somebody and you have to like request it and it's got a timeout and all that stuff. It's not like Bitcoin on chain where you can just have like an address and people send you stuff, or it's, I don't know, it's fire and forget sort of, it's going to eventually commit. There's a lot more, being a live protocol like that. I guess I knew about it, but seeing exactly why, it's going to be it's more of a challenge to get around. And maybe this isn't really a negative about Lightning, but I definitely got the feeling, and this is, of course, should be true anyway. It's very new. Like it's still very, it hasn't been around for 10 years. It's still in very active development. So, I know when Lightning first kind of went live, they were saying, it's what do they call it? Basically just saying, you're taking risks with your money here.
Reckless.
Reckless, yeah.
Hashtag reckless.
Right. Hashtag reckless. I think maybe we're a little beyond reckless, but I think some parts of it are still kind of reckless, like these huge channels and stuff. It's still very early, it's still an element of recklessness here. Which is, again, that's not maybe a negative, it's just a good thing for people to keep in mind.
I think for me,
set expectations.
Yeah, I think for me, just in terms of disappointments, I mean, I don't know if these are necessarily issues with the protocol itself so much as just implementation, our existing implementations and how we design those user experiences. But I think for me, it's just one is the backups is still just kind of, one of those issues we're still working through. And I'm, looking forward to, I think there's a lot of work being done in that area, but it's just a little, reading about it is a little scary. Just thinking about, what can go wrong if your channel state backup isn't fully up to date. There's solutions for that, but there's just more room for things to go wrong there than, the simple seed phrase backup that we're used to in Bitcoin. And I think the other one is just, I'll be curious to learn more about submarine swaps. I don't think the book really went too much into detail about that. I don't really think there was any chapter about that. I'm assuming it's something fairly similar to an HTLC or something, but I don't know if this ties into how this ties into the user experience you want to craft. But I personally would feel a little more comfortable just knowing that there's a way to move between on-chain and Lightning very, very easily and quickly. I think that you're going to have a future where you're going to have a lot of people who have been accumulating Bitcoin in cold storage over the past 10 years. And then some of those people are going to, be starting to download wallets on their phone, like Breeze and Moon and things like that. And I'd really like to know that there's just this, easy way for people to be able to move stuff between cold storage and Lightning wallets if they want to. And submarine swaps seem to me on a technical level like being a good solution for that, because I don't think everyone's going to be in the future. Not everyone is going to be running Umbrals and Embassy nodes and things like that. Those are super cool projects. I love those projects, and I run my own node myself. I don't think in the future everyone's going to be running their own nodes. So I'd like to see more exploration with submarine swaps and what the UI looks like for people being able to move stuff in and out of cold storage.
Yep, that will be interesting. The whole multi-key management, also with auto signers and hardware wallets and wallet limits and all of this stuff. I think cold storage is it's kind of a brute force solution. It's a complete isolation in physical reality, right? The other thing you could do is you have, something that like in Moon, they auto sign your. You have one key, they have one key, they auto sign the transactions, and that can be blocked basically. And then in the savings case study in the Bitcoin design guide, we also have a setup like that where there's auto signing happens for low value transactions, and then you also need a hardware wallet for the more for higher value transactions. Plus you have daily limits. There's all kinds of stuff you can do that require a lot more technical, collaboration between different devices and parties and all of this stuff. But it could also get you a similar secured or make it also incredibly hard for somebody to tamper with your funds. I'm really. It still feels like on chain we're still not at the level where multi-key setups are super easy for anyone to use. I'm curious when we'll get there, and then I'm curious when we'll get there with Lightning, or if maybe Lightning will get that done first, or I don't know. I'm very curious about that.
There's Lightning Signer, which is this project that I don't know enough about, but somehow can't stop talking about it. And I think that they're working on the idea of like you have these this external signing API where the key can be stored separately from the node, and you could use hardened hardware to actually house the private key that signs the messages. And then you could build security policies, which reminds me when I read about it on their GitLab page, pasted it in the chat. When I read about it in their GitLab page, it reminds me a lot of the kind of stuff that is in the guide, in the case study about having a wallet with different type spend limits defined, like you have a multi-sig setup and one key signs for small transactions but not for larger transactions. So they're trying to work on that I think with Lightning Signer, just this idea that you can have security policies, and so you can have this external key that signs on behalf of your Lightning node, but it's got specific policies about what it's allowed to sign for and what it's not allowed to sign for. And I think I think on a technical level, Lightning Signer is going to be the path towards getting us there, Christoph, just in terms of actually making that kind of hardened signing security thing a reality. But we will have a lot to do in that regard, I think, in terms of the UI and the user experience.
You can definitely. I mean, you're trying to replicate here is the current custodial banking system where you have a savings account and a checking account, and maybe you're periodically moving money from your very secure savings to your daily spending checking account, and these things with limits and stuff. But yeah, obviously there's way more you can do with Lightning. Like you could, if you had something, I don't know, like these submarine swaps or something, you could, you know, as my Lightning balance gets low, then I'm gonna trigger something to maybe rebalance out of my savings. Like it could happen completely automated in an automated way. Because yeah, you know, at least with Lightning 2, you want to keep that minimum balance needed in your channels. You don't want to ever have more on there probably than you need, just for safety reasons. So yeah, there's opens up a whole can of worms in terms of how that UX works, I guess.
Yeah, one thing with Lightning I'm curious about is the channel factories for the mega scaling, because the transactions are not going to suffice to onboard the whole world.
Yeah, this book didn't really talk too much about these future theoretical things. Like even Taproot wasn't really discussed at all, was it? I mean, I don't think he really mentioned how that's going to change the protocol per se, which could be a big change.
It's mentioned in the conclusion page.
Okay.
But yeah, it's just
just touched on. Yeah, because that's something I would have been really curious to hear, because yeah, the pay to tap point, or what it was called, the pay to point lock, I guess. Yeah, pay to point lock.
Point time lock contracts.
Point time lock, right?
PTLCs.
Point time lock. PTLCs, like that's a big change that is complicated. And I know that for the for those channel factories you're talking about, there's a whole new opcode needed. There's the any priv out opcode, and you know that's a big change that needs to happen in core first too. So yeah, these things are pretty early discussions, I think, but getting there like that, yeah, just kind of interesting to see how those will affect things.
Johns,
did you?
What's up?
Oh no, I was just clicking buttons. Sorry.
I didn't see what it did. Yeah, so yeah, these future things and how that's going to affect, you know, because I heard some interesting discussion probably on Twitter that if everybody's going to use Lightning someday, like everybody in the world, there's not necessarily enough UTXOs out there to have everybody have their own channel. So there's going to have to be channel sort of sharing. You want to do that. Trying to do that in a non-custodial way is going to be a challenge to onboard, you know, the other billions of people.
Yeah, I responded to somebody about that as well. They were like, yeah, you can't, there's not enough UTXOs for like everyone to have or something like this. I don't think they were necessarily talking about the scaling part, but maybe they were. But I think the other part of this is to understand that, like, yeah, we do have multisigs and, as you mentioned, the channel factory stuff. And so it's possible for multiple people to own one UTXO even, right? And I think what would be really interesting is to see what other layered stuff starts coming up with those concepts. Like if we have the ability to have multisig within the Lightning channel itself, like what does that construction of a node look like? And if one of those keys are like outside of the node, like the Lightning signer, then what does that what does that give in terms of like security and stuff to those participants of the shared UTXO?
Yeah, so that kind of future looking stuff, he was, I mean, it makes sense for this book. He's looking at just the nuts and bolts of what we have today. That's a pretty big topic, but yeah, it'd be interesting to someday capture those other concepts. Maybe future editions will have appendixes and things on these new things. I know that's basically what he's doing with the Bitcoin, the mastering Bitcoin. So I guess he'll keep doing it.
Is the book going to be updated as these things evolve? So will it be in 5 years? Will it be a completely different book, basically? And we need to do
which one? This one, the Lightning one?
Yeah.
Probably. I mean, I'm sure. Hopefully, there will be new editions. It's changing so fast.
Yeah, I mean, like I have a print copy of Mastering Bitcoin, and you can go and it's not a completely different book, but you can, go and try to look at the GitHub chapter and see that it actually looks way different than the Bitcoin chapter. Like there's entire topics. Like I think they removed the page about vanity addresses and things like that because it's just kind of like a, I don't know, older feature, more of a legacy thing. I may be wrong on that, but there's definitely, like, I've seen entire sections get swiped and all of that. So I'm sure the book will change pretty organically over the years. I'd be curious to see. I bet there's going to be a lot of discussion about Taproot and stuff like that in future versions.
Later on, well, I don't know. Can you support it with Lightning already? I don't know. I think it's kind of interesting that the book is updated, but so is the technology. So right now, I hear all of these points of view of what's needed and even what we cannot imagine yet. And I think it's always interesting to see how everything changes and how those things that seem like roadblocks, sometime in the future, somebody will figure out a solution that's better than what we have right now. And it's nice to see it even in something like a book that will grow over time and that'll be different as we go,
Yeah, it's going to have to evolve. The book will have to evolve. Probably it's going to have to evolve, this Lightning book, more than the Bitcoin book has, even, because I expect there to be a lot more innovation in Lightning. Just as we, as you opened up with Stephen, that it's you can have just different implementations supporting different things and developing it completely as a optional feature. So that's not as common probably with Bitcoin. Yeah, so it's gonna make this book a whole different can of worms.
Is there something from the book that you thought was really helpful in terms of going from theory to practice?
I'll admit I haven't set up a Lightning node yet, so I haven't practiced yet. It's all theory for me right now.
Yeah, they had a good chapter that, they provided some like Docker images you could download and set up your own Lightning node and all that. So that was a really good way to kind of get from the theory to the practice part of it, I thought.
I was just going to mention that I've been setting a Raspberry Bold testnet node over the past week, and it's really, really epic. I recommend it. I always thought the Raspberry Bolt was just like the grandfather of them all, of the Raspberry Blitz and the Umbrels and MyNode and whatever. But it's not at all. It's just a documentation website, and you build your own. And I really, really, really recommend it.
So it's not using Docker. You're literally just installing the daemons and stuff.
Yep. And the trick, or at least for me, what's working really well is when you do it for testnet, you really don't mind messing it up. And I got I paid $5 for a cloud instance, and so you can, because it's all command line, you can just do it on the cloud. I messed it up twice. I just wiped the whole thing, started from scratch. And
that's awesome. So, but technically, then, if it's just step-by-step instructions, you don't even necessarily need to be running it on a Raspberry Pi, right? You could, like you said, you run it in a cloud node. So
yeah, they recommend Debian, offshoot of Debian.
That's awesome. Right, that's a great tip. But probably how I'll try to do it too.
I'm loving it so far. I'm about 2/3 of the way through, and but this is something I've been working on for a long time with Padawan, the idea of leveraging testnet. But I think it empowers you in a way that mainnet doesn't. Are you going to really mess up with your Umbrella stuff? No, especially after you hear all the stories of people reckless and losing money and state problems and whatever. And even having hardware at home, I find is you want to be careful with it. But paying $5 a month for a cloud instance that you just wipe once a week because you try something new, it's really, really cool. And with testnet, it allows you, for another big thing for me that I want to try, for example, is the idea of stepping away from LND, but all the tutorials are on LND. All the basic nodes use LND. So if you want to do C Lightning, good luck with your mainnet, because you're unlikely to have the balls to do it with your mainnet node. Or it's just if you're using it, it's not conducive to trying it on the node that you're using at home. Whereas if you have it, some random testnet node on the cloud, you want to try Eclair, sure. Saturday afternoon, mess it up, and then start again on the Sunday morning.
So are you running a testnet Bitcoin D also on that?
Yep.
On that cloud node.
Yep.
Oh, so you have to have a bit of space on it.
Yep. It's 40. I think I have 40 gigs of storage and 2 gigs of memory, and it's running fine. Like you'll find that the guide recommends 4 gigs of memory, but I tried 2 and it went fine, and the whole thing downloaded in like 6 hours. So
this is a pruned node then? Is that, or?
Nope, full testnet.
Well, I guess testnet doesn't need as much space, I guess, as mainnet.
I think the whole thing's about 40 gig storage. Yeah.
That's nice.
Thunder Biscuit put his respeople.org link in the chat here for anyone who's interested. And then I just dropped a link for Lightning Polar, which lets you download these, if you want real super quick messing around, it, lets you just like point and click, create a network with like, an Eclair, LND, and C Lightning node running on RegTest, SimNet, whatever. Right there on your computer, which is kind of neat. You can open channels between the nodes, and so it's all fake test Bitcoin, which is nice because you can, as Thunder Biscuit was pointing out, just not be afraid to mess things up and just kind of develop and iterate quicker. So I'll share your enthusiasm for that. I think we need more dev tools that are just kind of quick test environments that let people mess around quicker. So we're getting kind of close to the hour here, and might go ahead and wrap things up so everybody can move on with their day. But I wanted to go ahead and point out that Christoph has been building badges for everybody. Did you want to speak about that?
Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I think you're muted, Christoph.
Oh, yeah. So that was just for fun to mess around. So the first call, I think we were like 15, 16 people or so. And then it seemed like every call, like somebody dropped off. And then it was the core group of like 5 people or so made it most of the way through. And then we're ramping up a little bit again here at the end. So I thought, like, okay, we can have these badges. And anybody else that should, I don't know, I just put something together. I'll just post it in Slack later on. You can ignore it. You can feel proud about it and be, see it as something precious and valuable, or you can laugh at it, whatever you want to do. I just thought I'm just having fun with this. So I have something visual at the end here.
Are you gonna click on each of those badges and export like a PNG for everybody?
If you'd like, I can.
I want a PNG. Yeah. I want to tweet out a PNG.
Sure.
Okay. Actually, no problem.
I don't know if anyone's interested in staying for another few minutes, but I had thoughts about like how do you, or if other people want to repeat this or that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And we should also thank you, Thunder Biscuit, for starting this reading club and for kind of opening a door to learning for a lot of people that wouldn't have been there had you not pursued this. And I don't know what other people think as far as starting a reading club, and also just sharing learning, like even what you're saying now of Raspberry Blitz and what everybody's sharing about what they're testing. It's stuff that can help others. So thank you.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Hey, awesome. And I could also tweet this out, Christoph. So I think I don't know Ram's Twitter handle. So if you could share it with me, I'll be happy to tag you. And I do have Steve's, and I don't know Anonset. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But if you'd like me to tag you on Twitter, please let me know.
Probably prefers to be anonymous here, considering the name is Anonset.
But
yeah, it's an open invitation.
Might have a Twitter, or she might have. I have no
idea. One thing that I was thinking about after this is too, we could do a reading book club for the design guide also.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, what you specifically raised the topic, Thunder Biscuit. Do you have any thoughts particularly about future reading sessions?
Oh, well, I wanted to say, I think, yeah, I think there's like, it's similar to what Steve was saying. There's so much value in sort of like having a little group that you're following along, and at some point, you know, by week 3, you're still like not maybe super committed, but by week 5, like you want to finish that chapter, you know, like I've felt the pressure before. So and I think it's reminds me also of the seminars that Chaincode Labs is hosting, right? They're doing these 5-week seminars now, where that's kind of what they do. You're expected to read a bunch of content and watch a bunch of content, and then you show up for a 3-hour discussion. So it's a bit more, you know, involved, but that's the whole thing. And I'm signed up for the January seminar, but I expect it'll be like super valuable as well. And I think that another thing, and this would like, there's no funding or whatever, so like you'd have to do it out of the goodness of your heart. But imagine leading one of these groups like 2, 3, 4 times over for the Mastering Bitcoin book or Mastering Lightning, right? Like you could have a maximum of 8 people to start, and then if you had somebody leading them, you could generate super, like a lot of value, I think, probably, because you'd also like know all the chapters, you'd know the answers to all the basic questions that people have. You would run into, you'd have like examples, maybe code pieces, cool links. I mean, I'm not saying I have the time to do it, but like that should be like a super interesting education piece of it. Is like if you started a cohort like once every 2 months, you started a new cohort of like 8 students that just went through Mastering Bitcoin together with like a lead on it, you'd generate a lot of value, I think. And this group made me realize it. That's what I wanted to say, basically. This group made me realize how like good it was, and how you could like.
You're right. I agree. Yeah. I mean, it's like I say one of the things is for our Atlanta meetup, the book club has turned out to be like, you know, one of the most, you know, popular events, with, you know, dedicated attendees and all of that. And the good thing about it is that like once you've kind of read the book yourself, you can, you know, you're then prepared to lead other people. You know, if you feel comfortable with it after the book, you could then, and it's like a scalable model. You don't have to, it doesn't require, like just doing a book club doesn't require all this like capital investment and stuff. You could do it in person, you can do it on the internet, and with these open source books, no one even has to pay for the book. So it's this like incredibly efficient way of kind of scaling the number of people who can learn about the topic.
Yeah, definitely something I'm going to encourage in my local LA meetup. You know, we have a lot of very new people. We probably won't start with Lightning, but it's kind of something I'm going to bring up with the group if people want to, you know, start ramping up their Bitcoin skills. So maybe start with the Mastering Bitcoin book too, because yeah, it's definitely a good model to motivate people to learn a little bit more about the nuts and bolts. And yeah, we'll see if there's interest. But yeah, and I'd like to encourage more of my local community here to get involved this way too. It's, you know, nice. It's definitely a great motivator, way to learn.
So
Cool.
Everybody,
well, thanks. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just gonna say Christoph has pasted the link in the chat. You can grab your badge. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now, and everybody can chill out for as long as they want to. So thanks for watching, everybody.